All right, all right, all right. Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We're happy to have you here on this beautiful Sunday, September 8th, 2024. We're here with Miss Margaret Appa, and we're here to discuss the subject of science and art, meaning and understanding explored. The Baha'i writings frequently refer to science and art, craft, and knowledge together. However, in our present society, it appears that science and art have no meaningful connection. And that's kind of crazy to me personally, but it seems to be true from my personal objective thought here, but maybe the audience here can comment as well. You're welcome to comment, all of you on YouTube and Facebook, welcome. This presentation explores not only the Baha'i writings, but aspects of cultural and language history to examine the connections between science and art, and how an alternative understanding might impact both individuals and communities. We are inviting you to this Zoom meeting, and we're so happy that all of you are joining us today on Zoom. And of course, those of you here on Facebook, those of you on YouTube, welcome. We are here to welcome Miss Margaret Appa. She has a degree in graphic design, a PGCE, and an MPhil in education. She has been involved in arts and education for a whole lifetime, working within the school system, as well as 10 years in teacher education, and many more years teaching adults to draw. She was one of the founders of the Baha'i Academy for the Arts. That was an annual week-long residential event in the UK between 1993 and 2010. She has recently published a book exploring further the concepts presented, titled The Science and Art of Being Human, published by George Ronald and widely available. I'll repeat, the book that she's written, which you can pick up today. This book is available. It is The Science and Art of Being Human. Again, the publisher is George Ronald, and it's available should you wish to take a look. It will be exploring the concepts that are presented today a lot more further. And for more information, should you wish, that book, The Science and Art of Being Human, is available for you to peruse. With that being said, welcome, Miss Margaret. We're so happy to have you with us. Hopefully, you've had a good weekend so far. I know it's 11, but over there in the United Kingdom, it's like 5 hours, right? It's like 6 a.m. over there. Happy
No,
Sunday.
four o'clock.
Huh?
4 p.m. 4 p.m.
Oh, sorry, wrong direction. 4 p.m. All right. So no early wake ups. You're just right in the middle of the afternoon. Oh, that's lovely. 4 p.m. Whew. So 5 hours ahead of us. I don't know. I said 5 hours ahead and then I decided to subtract. That happens, right? Sometimes us in America forgetting how to add or subtract. But yes, we're so happy to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you very much for that introduction. Yeah. How am I going to live up to that now? So where do I start? I When I was part of this Baha'i Academy for the Arts, I, which was a week-long residential event, annual event run over 17, we organized it over 17 years. There were questions that came up into my mind, questions that I wanted to answer. Those questions came from my curiosity that if we read the writings, there is no separation between science and art. But in our lives, well, certainly in my life, my education, science and art were two ends of a scale. They didn't really mix. And I was curious as to, well, what am I going to follow? Am I going to follow what's in the writings, or am I going to follow my own education and what I've been educated to think? So the questions that came up in my mind were many, and I wanted to answer them. So what I'm going to present to you is really a small part of that journey. So let's start at the beginning, shall we? Okay. Oh, Why can't I share? Let's see if this one works. Okay, here we go. All right. So how is the relationship between science and art presently understood? Okay, well, presently it's understood, I think, very clearly. So let's have a look at what generally people perceive the sciences to be. Science is generally perceived to be for the academic learner, for the intelligent. And being academic, being intelligent literally goes together. You can't separate the two. If you're seen to be intelligent, then you're expected to be academic. If you're seen to be academic, you're expected to be intelligent. So the two go together. Because of this, you go into the sciences, safe choice of career, guarantee of an income, and the sciences are indispensable. But what about the arts? Well, different language here. This is something I've been in arts and education all my life, so this is the sort of language that I'm used to. It's for the vocational learner and for the talented. You probably wouldn't go up to a physicist and say, wow, you're amazing, you're so talented, would you? You'd say, well, you're so intelligent. I don't think I could do what you do because you're so intelligent. It's a different language we use for science and for art. And it's seen as a bit of a risky choice of career. You know, you can hear parents when they're young, when their youngsters come to them and say, Mom, Dad, I'd like to go and study dance or drama or go into some sort of creative industry. There will be a sort of a sharp intake of breath and say, well, perhaps you should get a proper degree first. This is slowly changing, but it's still there. It's also a risky choice of career, no guarantee of an income. And the arts, are they dispensable? They're totally dispensable. So I have no idea what it's like in the USA, but certainly in the UK, if there's a financial crisis and schools are having to cut their budgets and cut things down, it's not going to be the sciences that are cut. It's going to be the provision of that music teacher who comes in, or someone who does drama, or somehow negotiating to push things together to make the arts curriculum slightly more manageable. So it is dispensable, always dispensable. So, okay, where do we go from here? So this is where we're starting from. But the question I ask this question to you, is this a false dichotomy, do you think? Is this really true? Or is it that it's the way we've been educated to understand? Okay, let's take this a bit further now. Science. Well, I could say any of you could give me a definition of science, but I asked the question, what is the meaning of science across all languages? And for me, this was a real light bulb moment when I discovered that actually science means something very different from what I'd been educated to understand science was. So what do you think across all languages? Let's say Latin, Greek, Arabic, Farsi, Indo-European, etc., etc., etc. What is the word that comes up again and again? And the word that comes up again and again is knowledge. Now, this is interesting because if you're part of the Baha'i community, then knowledge, the feast of knowledge, is ilm. And it's translated as science, but actually means it's the feast of knowledge. And the word scientist first appears in the mid to late 1800s. So that word wasn't there to use at the time when the Bab and Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha were writing. The word scientist first appears then because there was a professor of philosophy in Cambridge University who wanted a generic name. He wanted a name that he could put all these people doing all these interesting things, and he could use one word, like artist, like humanist. And so he invented the word scientist. Okay. So what about over time? What about the word science over time? What does it mean? And this is quite interesting. This is quite interesting in the sense that if you look through this, you'll see how it's changed. So in the 1200s, expertness, intelligent, skilled, we're talking about science, okay? Skilled would be probably more a word that we would use about art. 1400s, knowledge acquired by study, book learning, particular branch of knowledge. Skillfulness, craftiness, used to explain science. Again, these are probably words that we would use to explain now. We would use to say, well, Skill is what you need when you're doing a craft or an art, absolutely. But in the 1400s, experiential knowledge, a skill, a handicraft, a trade. Now, isn't that interesting? So science, the words that were being used at that time were crossing over. There wasn't a separate language for science and for art, which we'll see in a moment. Then in the 1600s, suddenly the separation comes. It's now science is nothing about art. Fascinating. 1725, you can read that. That is how we would describe science now. It's what we would understand by the word science. Okay, but what about art? So looking at that, seeing that flow through from 1200s to the 1700s, what about art? Root meaning, skill. Root meaning is skill. An artist, and the word art comes from the word Latin, from the word ars. An artist is a person with a skill. Not a person with a skill in painting, drawing, drama, music, writing, a person with a skill, very, very broad. And that is the difference. Early 1200s, in the 1200s, learning or practice, work of art, practical skill, a business, a craft. So if you had a skill in business, you were still an artist. It wasn't about what you did, it was about the skill, that you had a skill, whatever that skill was, you were an artist. 1300s, skill in scholarship, learning, seven sciences, or the liberal arts, so philosophy, geography, history, etc. And then in the 1600s, use for one skilled in any art or craft. Well, okay, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? But look what it included. Professors, surgeons, craftsmen, cooks. Okay. A professor, an artist? That would be interesting today. So a professor, because they had a skill, they were an artist. But look what happens in the 1700s again, same as for science. First used to describe one who practices the arts of design or visual arts. Okay, so my immediate question was, why? Why in the 1700s did that happen for both science and for both science and art? And I'm not going to go into detail. You can look it up just like I did. It was all to do with the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. When science was bubbling up to the surface, there were hundreds of people, thousands of people started it. The movement started in Europe. It was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. It was that sort of time. There were experiments being done, discoveries being made, things being invented. It was just a huge bubbling up of knowledge, an application of knowledge. And at the same time, the same period, the church, which had always been the holder of knowledge, that became slightly pushed aside. The church, and I'm simplifying this very brief, to make it very brief, the church was pushed aside. And because the church was pushed aside, the arts also were slightly denigrated to the side of things, because all those beautiful things that came out of the church, the buildings, the stained glass windows, the paintings, everything, that all the beautiful, beautiful work that came out of the church was pushed aside with it and pushed to one side. That then fed into education, fed into our education system, which was just in the 1700s, was beginning to be formalized. So this is a European perspective, but I think that our education system has been exported all over the world. So I imagine that this would be quite similar. So this is the history of the language. So what have we looked at so far? We've established language-wise that actually science means knowledge, quite broad. And in Arabic and Farsi, it's sometimes the search for knowledge. There are nuances in meaning there. It means knowledge, and art means a skill. So let's go on from there. What do you think? What do you think science and art meant to the Bab-Baha and Abdu'l-Baha when they were actually writing all the writings that we now have to benefit from? What did science and art mean to them? Well, we've probably already answered the question. Science meant knowledge, still does. Art meant a skill, still does. And what did art mean in terms of what in reality did it mean? It meant something far, far broader than we understand it now. So these are some of the things that would have been considered an art at the time of the Bar Bahá'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Bahá. Calligraphy, tool making, house building, music, dance, agriculture, poetry, teaching, glasswork, and industrial items. I don't think now that we would say that industrial items were works of art, but at the time, because art meant a skill, they were. The beautiful things that were produced at that time were all works of art because they involved a skill. So I found this that the discovery of what science and art meant over history of language, and also what art meant at the time. So my big question was, well, okay, if that's what art and science meant, was in the heads of the Bar Bahá'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Bahá, because that was the language they were using, then what is it about my education that I describe it differently, I understand it differently, which is right? So there's a question for you. Which do you take, your own education or what it meant at the time? Okay, so let's go further with this. Let's have a look at a quotation and see what we can understand from this quotation. Knowledge is one of the wondrous gifts of God. It is incumbent upon everyone to acquire it. Two statements. Knowledge is one of the wondrous gifts of God. It is incumbent upon everyone to acquire it. Got that? Okay. But immediately, what does Baha'u'lláh say? Such arts and material means as are now manifest have been achieved by virtue of his knowledge and wisdom. And I'll just stop it there, although there isn't a full stop there. What do we understand by those first 5 lines? Do you read it the same as I do? I'm not necessarily reading it. I'm not necessarily saying that what I'm thinking is the truth. But when I read that, I see an immediate connection between knowledge as one of the wondrous gifts of God and the arts, because it's telling me that the arts that are now manifest have been achieved by virtue of his knowledge and wisdom. So there's a connection there between knowledge and the arts. Interesting. And then it goes on to say, but we have to go back to the beginning of that sentence, such arts and material means as are now manifest have been achieved by virtue of his knowledge and wisdom, which have been revealed in epistles and tablets through his most exalted pen. A pen out of whose treasury pearls of wisdom and utterance, could that be knowledge? And the arts and crafts of the world are brought to light. So for me, when I read that now, I read it as saying, look at the connection, knowledge and arts, twice, said in different words, but said twice. So what is this bringing to us? That there is a connection between knowledge and art. Science and art are not separate. There is a connection, but what is that connection? Okay, let's look at the next one. So this one, Abdu'l-Bahá. And here again, I just give you a moment to read that through yourself and to think for yourself, what are you understanding from that? I'll just give you a moment to do that. Are you reading into that the same that I'm reading? That it's talking about, see how in this day the scope of sciences and arts together, and this is very common in the writings, sciences, arts, knowledge, craft are words that are used together. Obviously, there's a connection. They are not separate. In the eyes of Abdu'l-Bahá, science and art are not separate, hath widened out, and what wondrous technical advances have been made. And today, if we think where we are now, amazing. We all carry our little brains around with us in our pockets, don't we? The technical achievements are amazing. And then he goes on to say, to what a high degree the mind's powers have increased. Is that to do with knowledge? And what stupendous inventions have appeared? And the inventions are the arts. Things that have been invented via our knowledge to these amazing things that we have to use in the world. I don't know whether you see that in the same way that I do, but I see that as confirming that science and art has a very close connection. But what is that connection? And that's what we need to find out. Okay. All right, here's a person you will know. Mr. Hooper Dunbar served for several years many years on the Universal House of Justice, and also recognized and highly respected as a painter. So he comes from this, what we would call in the traditional sense, an arts background, and he has huge knowledge to boot. So I came across this quite by accident. 2017, this was a presentation that Mr. Dunbar made to an ABS, Association of Baha'i Studies conference in the United States, and his theme was Baha'u'llah. His theme was Baha'u'llah. I sat down one afternoon in 2017, late 2017, wanted something to watch, picked this one up purely by chance, and 25 minutes into his presentation, full flow about Baha'u'llah, this is what he said.
I'm going to interrupt just for a second to say something that I wanted to with regard to art. In Haifa, we put together a compilation on science and art. And as you examine the original writings, you find that science is knowledge and art is application or technology. Abdu'l-Baha calls it dentistry art. Abdu'l-Baha calls agriculture art. If you think of this phrase, a wonderful phrase that you put, the artist is the source of everything, in a little broader context, it doesn't eliminate the fine arts. The fine arts are right there. He talks about the painter with the brush, but it does extend. So if you don't happen to be good at painting or sculpture or modern dance, don't despair. Go on with your services to mankind through application of science, through the application of knowledge. Okay, sorry to interrupt with that, but I think it's an interesting point for us to bear in mind. There's a list of Abdu'l-Baha, what he calls arts. It's just about, it includes everything that you could do in the world.
Now imagine 2017, I'd been exploring this subject, doing the research, having hundreds of conversations with people, trying to understand what this was all about. While the Baha'i Academy for the Arts was going, so this was 2017, so probably for 10 years, I'd been working on this subject. And I had come to the same conclusion that Mr. Dunbar puts in this little brief interruption in his presentation. I was, of course, absolutely thrilled because I had arrived at the point where I wasn't sure whether what I was doing and what I was discovering made any sense. So it was, I was very happy when I heard this, had to repeat it several times over. So what does Mr. Dunbar say? Science is knowledge. Okay, we've sort of established that for ourselves. Art is application or technology. Okay, not quite sure, he doesn't explain. And then he says, don't despair. He says, if you can't paint, you can't do modern dance, don't despair. Go on with your services through the application of science, the application of knowledge. Fascinating. But what does he mean? Well, let's go on a little journey here. We've already established that science means knowledge and art means skill. Language, the history of language tells us this. Okay, so what I want you to do is just to humor me for a few minutes, is to take science and art out of the equation, and we'll just think about the words knowledge and skill just for a moment and see, where does that take us? What can we understand from that? So what are your skills in life? You have a multiple range of skills, I'm sure. Well, you might be any one of these people. Apologies if you're not down here, but you might be a musician, you might be a carpenter, a dancer, a physicist. Sure, there are plenty of parents, a facilitator, a plumber, any of these you might be. But how do you, in your life, how do you express your skills that you have? So you have knowledge, but you also have skills. What is the connection between them? And this is what we're going to come to understand. But your skills are particularly interesting. And I came across this concept that I'm going to present to you. And of course, when I saw it, just like I think you will say, oh, well, yes, of course, that makes sense. but it wasn't in my conscious understanding. So I want to bring it to your notice and see how you feel about it. So your art or skills create objects, might do. So if you are, for example, a car designer, your output, the objects you produce will be cars. It's a physical object. If you're a house builder or an architect, then your aim in life is to produce houses, physical objects. You're a gardener or a horticulturalist, then gardens are your thing. Gardens can be touched, trees can be touched, earth can be touched, flowers can be touched. Any of these things are objects. We all create meals. That meal is a thing that you put that on the plate. It's there, it's physical, you can touch it. And of course, we all know those family meals where they disappear in 30 seconds. You've taken 2 hours to prepare them and then they're gone. But this is only one way that your skills or your arts can be expressed. What about this? What about experiences? What do I mean by experiences? Well, okay, look at some examples. Dance. Can you touch dance? You can touch the dancer, perhaps, but you can't touch dance. It's an experience. You can't touch a study. For those of you who are involved in study circles, either as participants or tutors, study circles, you can't touch the study circle. You can only experience it as a wonderful experience. Maybe sometimes it could be a frustrating experience. Whatever it is, it's an experience. Music, well-being, storytelling, conversations. This is one we take for granted, don't we? We have conversations, but actually our conversations demand that we have both knowledge and skills. We have to have the knowledge of the language we're having the conversation in for a start. So am I putting the words in the right order to mean what I want them to mean? And then there's a whole other aspect of conversations. How are we putting that conversation across? Are we angry? Are we happy? Are we feeling contented? Are we wanting to help somebody? Are we, what is the environment of that conversation? How are we using those words? How are we putting those words across? That's the art. That's the skill of a conversation. So a conversation is both knowledge and skills, like everything else in life. It's all about knowledge and skills. And if I think what Mr. Dunbar said, Abdu'l-Baha says that the arts are almost everything that you can do in life. Okay, do we not all create objects and experiences every day? This is part of our lives. Okay, so this is one of my favorite quotations from Abdu'l-Baha. And he says, to admit that health is good does not constitute health. A physician, let me just get rid of this. A skilled physician is needed. A physician is required to have complete knowledge of pathology, diagnosis, therapeutics, and treatment. His mere knowledge is not health. Fascinating use of that word. His mere knowledge is not health. We'll come back to that. It must be applied and the remedy carried out. The attainment of any object is conditioned upon knowledge, volition, and action. Unless these three conditions are forthcoming, there's no execution or accomplishment. Now, my fascination with this was, why did Abdu'l-Baha use the word mere in that sentence? His mere knowledge is not health. He could have put his knowledge is not health, which is absolutely, that makes sense. Of course, his knowledge is not health. It has to be applied. It has to be put into action, doesn't it? But why the use of the word mere? And especially in the world that we live in right now, knowledge is king. In the schools, certainly here in the UK, knowledge is what we examine. Knowledge is something that we ask our young people to learn knowledge, facts, information, and then make sure that they come out correctly in examinations. But is life about knowledge? Half of life is about knowledge, but the other half is about its application. And Abdu'l-Baha makes that very clear. The attainment of any object is conditioned upon knowledge, volition, the want or the will, and action. And in my mind, action demands skills. You can't have action without skills. So here he's saying that you have knowledge, you have the want to apply it, but the action is the proof. The action, putting that knowledge into action through your skills, is what it's all for. So unless these three conditions are forthcoming, there's no execution or accomplishment. I find that as a fascinating quote from Abdu'l-Baha. But what about the Universal House of Justice? What are we gaining in terms of understanding these areas, this relationship between science and art from the Universal House of Justice? Well, this was in 2010. It was a Rizwan message 2010. I must have read it at that time, but I honestly don't think that I understood it, but I understand it very differently now. What does it say? Access to knowledge is the right of every human being, and participation in its generation, application, and diffusion. So that's the generation of knowledge, the application of knowledge, and the diffusion of knowledge. This is a responsibility that all must shoulder in the great enterprise of building a prosperous world civilization. Each individual, according to his or her talents and abilities, justice demands universal participation. This is a really strong statement, very strong statement. At the beginning, it is the right of every human being to have access to knowledge, but look, also our responsibility is to generate, apply, and diffuse knowledge. All of us, not just those who have the PhDs, every single human being on the planet, because every single human being on the planet has the capacity, has the understanding, has the creative capacity and the intellectual understanding to be able to contribute according to their talents and their individual talents and abilities to this building of a prosperous world civilization. And justice demands universal participation. No one can be left out. That's a fascinating statement. Everybody is involved, from those of us who live in these very developed areas and those who live in less developed areas. According to our talents and abilities, we all have that capacity. Okay, so what about 2021? Well, increasingly, participation in institute courses is preparing the Friends of God for an ever deeper engagement in the life of the wider community. It is endowing them with the knowledge, the insights, and skills. What was it Abdu'l-Baha said? Abdu'l-Baha said knowledge, volition, and action. Knowledge, insights, and skills that enable them to contribute not only to the process of developing their own community, but to the progress of society. So it's reinforcing everything that Abdu'l-Baha is telling us, but also what was said in that 2010, which was 11 years previous to this, was said there. This is reinforcing those exact ideas that knowledge, insights, and skills are one thing. So our knowledge, which is our science, our insights or our volition, and the skills or our arts are an integral part of this building a prosperous world civilization and developing our own communities and society. Okay, so if we go to one more of the Universal House of Justice, and this one I think was particularly powerful for me, having been a part of arts and education all my life, and having always felt that the arts were never seen, never valued in the same way that the sciences were valued. This was an amazing statement. What do they say? They say in this new series of plans, increasing attention needs to be given to other processes that seek to enhance the life of a community. For example, by improving public health, protecting the environment, or drawing more effectively on the power of the arts. Wow. So public health, big subject. No country in the world is going to make progress without attending to the needs of public health. It is huge. Protecting the environment, absolutely huge, particularly in these days of climate change, etc., trying to learn how to nurture our earth in order to provide for us, to provide for all the creatures that live on the earth. And that public health, protecting the environment, on the same level. The Universal House of Justice is putting on the same level, drawing more effectively on the power of the arts. What does that mean? I don't think we know what that means yet. I perhaps could share my own ideas on that. But what does that mean? Drawing more effectively on the power of the arts. It's not saying using the arts. It's not saying using the power of the arts. It's saying drawing more effectively on the power of the arts. How do we understand that? That's perhaps a question we could come back to if that's a question that interests you. So let's come towards the end now of the presentation. And here we have a quotation of Abdu'l-Baha, which is one which I think applies simply across the world to all of us. Let the loved ones of God, whether young or old, whether male or female, each according to his capabilities, bestir themselves and spare no efforts to acquire the various current branches of knowledge, both spiritual and secular, and of the arts. This is really saying everything in one very short little quotation, isn't it? Whether young or old, male or female, each according to his capabilities. And you know, the Bab wrote beautifully about it. We won't be touching on that today, wrote beautifully about this. And he said that what is expected is that everyone does their best, not more than that, but not less than that either. So no competition. It's about what each of us is capable of doing. It's not about us competing with anyone else. So it's each according to his capabilities, bestir themselves, spare no effort to acquire the various current branches of knowledge, both spiritual, secular, and of the arts. So I'm hoping that in this short presentation, maybe I've stirred up a few thoughts in your mind about what that relationship between science and art is. Is it what we read in the writings, or is it what we've been educated to understand in our education systems? And in order to try and bring this to a conclusion for myself, I put together, for me, a proposed summary of understanding. So I'm certainly not saying this is the truth or this is right, but I'm saying this is where I'm at now. And I'd love you to join that conversation and perhaps go further with it. 10 years' time, 5 years' time, I might be further down the line. But this is how I understand it right now. And I'd like to go back to Mr. Hooper Dunbar, because what he was saying, I understood as being absolutely the right interpretation. So I would agree with Mr. Dunbar. I'd say art is the application of science, but, and there's always a but, only as long as the understanding of both science and art is broad and inclusive, where science is understood as any system of knowledge, art any form of skill or expertise that enables that system of knowledge to be applied in practice to produce a unique, creative outcome that is of benefit to mankind. Remember, Mr. Dunbar said that Abdu'l-Baha had a list of what he called the arts, which was about almost anything that we can do in life. So for me, any system of knowledge might be the system of knowledge that a parent needs in order to bring up their family, as much as a mathematician or a physicist or a farmer or a textile worker or a fisherman. Any one of these people, of all the thousands of things we do in the world, we all have science and art. We all have knowledge and skills to offer this world. So thank you very much. I will stop sharing. Okay, John, over to you. John?
Yes, hello. So we have with us quite a few questions / comments, and
Okay.
I'm trying to find where to start. I start with the best comment ever. Terry McBride said, "Dells are very good." I'm happy, Terry. I'm glad. I think so at the moment. And yes,
Girls are very good. What does that exactly mean, Terry?
So that was a joke that was started at the beginning of the conversation before we got
Okay.
started. So what I'd like to do is hopefully we can focus mainly on the presentation as much as possible, and if we can get some questions to help get the conversation going is what I'd prefer, and then we could conclude with any comments.
Sorry, John, is there a way we might encourage people? I would love to see faces. Is there any way of encouraging people so I can be talking to people, not to...
Yes, please, everyone, turn your videos on. But so beyond the icebreaker, I was going to ask Terry for his I was going to ask Terry for his thoughts, not on a Dell computer, but on the subject of the matter today. So Terry, I understand you had a question you wanted to ask.
Well, let's see. I have several questions. The fact that the Universal House of Justice has made education a human right, so to speak. I'm looking at the present situation of where you have a lot of student debt, burdening a lot of of the newer generations. It's just like, how are we going to be able to address all these upcoming situations, especially we've got these. I mean, you said that agriculture is an art, medicine is an art, science in itself is an art. I mean, where do I begin?
Where do you begin?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Brilliant question. Yes, education, we're not in a good place, are we? You're saying this, so you're coming from that perspective in the USA. I can certainly see the pressures on young people here because we don't actually value the skills. We value the knowledge, but we don't value the skills to be able to apply that knowledge. So we see the arts in a very narrow sense. Right now, we see the arts as the visual arts, the performing arts, and the written arts. And those are seen as the arts. But actually, when you broaden out from a Baha'i perspective, that agriculture is art, farming is art, everything is all the skills we have are all arts. Where in our education system are we actually focusing on allowing young people to gain skills? They gain a lot of knowledge, but how are they gaining the skills to think, to synthesize, to understand, to question, the practical skills to be able to work their way through life? We're not. Changes need to come, but they're not going to come quickly, and we have to accept that. But we can begin in our own community activities by valuing the arts and the skills and not putting them to one side. We can, as parents, we can value rather than push them to one side, rather than saying, well, perhaps you ought to get something that you can earn a living on. We maybe ought to be encouraging our children to consider those careers or those professions or those occupations that give them joy, because they should be in their element. I don't know whether Ken Robinson is a figure that this audience knows about. He was in the States for a long time, and he said quite rightly, we educate creativity out of our children because we focus so much on knowledge.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Yes, I remember I studied accountancy, and I remember when you said I hated accountancy at the start. But I remember beloved guardian said, in order to go pioneering, you have to study the subjects that when you go to a place, to a pioneering course, you can get a job.
Yep.
So I thought I studied accountancy, and in accountancy, when I was studying in a degree, one of the definition of the science and art was that the science, given the same condition anywhere in the world, that the law and regulation applies. The art is something that changes from one place to the other. So I always found that sufficient for me, because if I see something that everybody thought it was art, but it has proved that to be different under different conditions, then I would say, no, it is not art. It is not science, it is art. For example, the water boils under a certain condition. For example, certain temperature and certain pressure and so on and so forth. Anywhere in the world you go and you apply that condition, you will get that thing coming through. So we call that was science. But anything else, for example, in accountancy, we know it is not going to be applied the same way everywhere. The situation change, the country you go change. So as a result, it is not something that they can call science. So that was my understanding, and I thought that was very sufficient for me all these years.
Yeah, well, I think you're in a way you're quite right, because what you're saying is science is knowledge, and the arts are the skills. So I would call accountancy an art, the art of accountancy, because it's a skill. That doesn't mean to say it doesn't have, you have to have a huge amount of knowledge behind it, but to apply your knowledge, you need to have the art of accountancy. You need to have that understanding and be able to explain it to other people, be able to work it all out. That is an art, definitely.
Yes, it is true. But what is the difference between the science? I thought always in my mind that the science is, if given the same condition, it doesn't change.
Well, that's one
Whereas
way.
whereas in art, it does. The same situation, one person might say, I'm going to deal with it this way, and the other person says, no, I can deal with it in a different way. For
Well,
example,
yes, that applies to anything, doesn't it, really? But science evolves. So science does change over time. There are things that may be thought to be absolute truth now in science, but maybe in a few years' time, our
but
future knowledge will change
that means
it.
the definition at the start was wrong, because if it was changing, the only reason that at the moment it is changing because it wasn't science in the first place.
Yes, I think,
See what I mean?
yes, let's accept that in this limited situation, I don't really want to take over the conversation on one question, because I am aware that there are people
Yeah,
who want to
so
ask a
we have a question from Regina Colston, and then we have a hand raised. So we can move to Regina, and then I also have an item after Fariba. So Regina, Fariba, then myself. So Regina's question, if you like to unmute, you're welcome, Regina, to do so. I'll read it off until you do. She wrote, "Thank you for the gift of knowledge." Now her question, what were the questions you had at the beginning of your study? At this stage of your study, what were the questions you did not ask?
Who knows? What were the questions I had? Gosh, the questions I had were many. One was that one question which might be of interest to this audience. One question I had when I was part of the team organizing the Baha'i Academy for the Arts was that here we were isolating the arts into a sort of an exclusive annual week-long, absolutely amazing, buzzing with energy, buzzing with creativity. And I was also, my experience prior to that had been with summer schools. I've been to summer schools since I was 8 years old. And my experience of summer schools was that they were very academic. They were very learning focused events. In the very early days, you listened to lectures, and then later on courses, and you could choose courses to do. And the arts were the evening entertainment. They were someone writing a play, performing a play, reciting poetry or playing music, whatever it was. There was a complete separation from the academic learning, the learning side, and the art side. And I didn't understand that, because my understanding of the arts was beginning to realize that, and as I'd said in the presentation, the arts are not only about painting, drawing, music, drama. They are also the art of teaching, the art of animating, the art of facilitating, the art of conversation, the art of negotiation, the art of consultation. These arts also need to be a part of what we're learning about. So in summer school, I felt that it was very academic focused, and the arts are left to one side. But I could understand why that was so, because that's how we've been educated. We've been educated to understand that actually the sciences are the academic side, or the learning side is more important than what is seen in terms of arts as the entertainment. But the arts are actually far more than that. And that's what I'm gathering from reading the writings now, far, far more than that. If you read the Barb's writings on excellence, which is all about learning, it's all about excellence, absolutely mind-blowing. nothing tells you that arts is about entertainment in those writings. It's much deeper, much more meaningful, much more useful than we recognize at the moment. Is that enough of an answer or not enough of
Yes.
an
Thank you. I appreciate it.
answer?
Regina,
Let me say, I defer to you, Dr. Al. I
Okay.
defer to you. Thank you for your gift.
Thank you, Regina. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
and now we have Fariba.
Yes, thank you, Margaret. That was fascinating. You know, in Baha'i way of talking about, like, you know, we always say harmony of science and religion. And I think I heard now about the harmony of science and art.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like the fact that you had this pictures of the brain and, you know, half kind of shades and, you know, whatever way you had designed it. You know, I'm in mental health in psychology, and when I wanted to go into studying psychology, we were either could go into psychology as art or psychology as science.
Oh, isn't that
So,
interesting?
yeah, and you know, in the way the brain works, I'm not a neuroscientist, or you know, but we had to just sort of learn a little bit about the brain, becoming psychologists, and you know that the way that our brain the two sides of the brain have to work together, and the different parts. And I think, you know, it was just fascinating hearing your talk that it just, you know, these thoughts are not quite formed in my head really well, because I just heard your talk and but, you know, it really made me think that is, you know, our scientific side, you know, head, a side of our brain, and a creative side, they have to work together for anything that we want to do.
Oh,
So it's amazing. And you know, just something about when you were talking about Abdu'l-Baha, Baha'u'llah, and Bab, and they were all artists, every single one of them. They were all, you know, kind of quite accomplished in calligraphy and some other, you know, when you look at their calligraphy is an art, and it was something, you know, art that was very, very important. So it just for them to talk so much about the arts, you know, it's not surprising that they were, you know, art was, and poetry. Every single one of, like, you know, Baha'u'llah had poetry, and Abdu'l-Baha wrote a lot of poetry. And I can't remember if the Bab, maybe, you know, poetry was also quite a very something that was practiced by most of the Holy Family and our significant Baha'is in our faith. So thank you.
thank you. Thank you, Fariba.
So now we come to me. Before we do, I want to read something from Robert's iPhone. So Robert Dean is one of our Baha'i friends here in the local community. He
Okay.
says, one of the oldest applications of science as art is medicine.
Yeah.
Water boils at 100 degrees, but application of this science can be used to boil eggs. The skill of the chef is the art of using this science applied to their art.
Yeah.
With that said, thank you so much for sharing that, Robert. Everyone can definitely learn from that. The takeaway, in addition to this, that I think we should have is that science is any knowledge that's reproducible, that given a common medium to convey it, someone can use that knowledge too, following the same method, the same steps. They can arrive at the same conclusion. And again, they can evaluate it to improve upon it. And there was a gentleman, Mr. Mazidian, brought up the idea of science. There's science as it describes reality, and there's science as a body of knowledge. The body of knowledge only exists as good or as well as those who store it. So it's really humanity and the thought of humanity that controls where science goes, despite the fact that reality and truth never change. But the body of knowledge itself always does, because we ourselves are limited by our storage media. So the medium by which we store information, be it the oral tradition as it was historically before time that we've recorded, and nowadays we are improving upon how we store data. Now we can store terabytes and not pay a lot of money, but you can actually, at a store, commercially viable now, you can go to a store and buy terabytes of storage and store terabytes of data, which just 30 years ago was inconceivable. The idea that the common human being can do so. So we're moving at light speed right now in terms of our exponential growth of ability to record knowledge. Of course, we're exponentially sharing cat videos and everything else online, but the scientists are making great use of this too. So the takeaway I wanted to mention was that this idea of art and marrying science being so important is that if we take this back to the Baha'i writings and what Baha'u'llah has it's a part of a prohibition, and it's also a part of a what is the mission of a Baha'i. From Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, an amazing work of Baha'u'llah where he cites his own writings, and it's really a reaction to the martyrdom of two beautiful Baha'i gentlemen, one being called the King of Martyrs, the other being called the Beloved of Martyrs. They were martyred for their faith. They were also in the art of business themselves, and they had quite a bit going on. But unfortunately, as a pretext for not paying their debts, people, instead of paying their debts, chose to ensure that they don't pay their debts when the gentlemen who hold the debts are dead. So this quote that we have comes from this epistle to the Son of the Wolf. The Son of the wolf is the person who was given this name, who engaged actively in martyring Baha'is, and also the Son of the Wolf too. So he writes, "Beware lest ye shed the blood of anyone. Unsheath the sword of your tongue from the scabbard of utterance, for therewith ye can conquer the citadels of men's hearts. We have abolished the law to wage holy war against each other. God's mercy hath verily encompassed all created things, if ye do but understand. Aid ye your Lord, the God of mercy, with the sword of understanding. Keener indeed is it, and more finely tempered than the sword of utterance, were ye but to reflect upon the words of your Lord. Thus have the hosts of divine revelation been sent down by God, the help in peril, the self-subsisting, and thus have the armies of divine inspiration been made manifest from the source of command, as bidden by God, the all-glorious, the best beloved." And I'd like to just full circle this, that there is a real connection with God when we are trying to express science through art, that if we have faith in God, we are guided to do amazing things in amazing ways that we never could contemplate had it not been through our faith. And it's interesting that when we look at history, when the Muslims had governed Spain, in Spain, that is the European country Spain, the Moors, they had, when they were around the fire, they would dance. And when someone did something that people, the art of the dance, would see the glimpse of God, they would chant Allah, Allah, Allah. Well, the Spanish didn't get rid of that. They just, not pronouncing Arabic as they didn't speak Arabic, would be saying ole, 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 ole. So something interesting, that when we have this divine experience, when we witness the art and the divine inspiration flowing through someone else, being in awe and giving that credit to divine inspiration, calling out God's name, invoking God, it's a very intriguing concept, because I don't know of any scientist who's really been formative in science that didn't also have faith and didn't rely on God in achieving their understanding, all the way from the gentleman who was a monk who had peas and helped found genetics, Gregor Mendel, Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton, amazing minds. Mr. Leibniz, the co-founder of calculus with Mr. Isaac Newton. So without saying more, I just wanted to convey that where we had explained that science is an area of knowledge, a body of understanding. It is not per se, in this context, reality, because reality and science, the study of reality, are very different. Humans will never have a full picture of reality. That's unattainable, just as God would be. So with that being said, we all will strive ever closer every day, hence the art of achieving that understanding.
Thank you, John. Can I just, three very small points responding to what you've just said, that knowledge, if it has no purpose, knowledge has no purpose unless it's applied. So the collection of knowledge, useful as it is, if it's not applied, it's not going to produce anything. So I think that's very important to understand. And then your piece about the son of the wolf, what I was understanding from that was that actually the art of conversation, which is what we're encouraged within the Baha'i community to use as one of the skills we are asked to use, is the art of conversation, was paramount in that. And then you mentioned something about that, yes, about dance and in Spain. Dance is a science and an art. So everything that we do in life is both knowledge and skills. It's not that one is one and one is the other.
A question to you, because you mentioned something really amazing about the application. As Baha'is, we're talking about application all the time, walking a path of service. How can we use this understanding that art truly is found in the application of knowledge? How can we provide impact to the world so people can really be inspired to get up and do something?
I think my learning on that over the years is that we need to see the arts in any skill that we have, whether that's cooking, parenting, whatever it is. We need to see the arts that we have and the arts we can learn, because we can learn skills if we have the volition to do it, that we see them as learning tools, not just as pretty decoration. We've tended to see the arts as, oh, it's a nice picture on the wall. It's you write a quote and you decorate the quote, and we see it as decoration. We don't see it as a learning tool. So the learning tool using the arts, can I come up with an example? Say working in a study circle and then getting everybody to work to take one quote and to do a group piece of work which expresses that quote, using whatever creative, artistic, whatever creative means that you can, where that piece of work becomes a learning tool. That piece of work reinforces the learning. That piece of work will stay in the memory. We all know, those of us who are educators, and I'm sure there are other educators on this call, those of us who are educators know that if you teach just verbally, a certain amount of information will go in. If you then illustrate what you're talking about verbally, that learning becomes a little more embedded. But if you then take those people and do something with them so that they are using the arts as a learning tool to reinforce their learning, they'll never forget it. We never forget those pieces of those times when we've engaged with someone or something in an event or whatever it is. And it's, oh, well, do you remember when we made this, when we made that, when we explored that idea? Do you remember that? That is what we remember. And that's what we should be using the arts for. Yeah, it's a learning tool.
Definitely very scintillating right here. This piece right here, I feel a lot of people can have a real breakthrough with this, because the idea of the arts being so broad in application, because it is fundamentally born of application, means so much to everyone, because we're moving away from this stagnancy, which Ria Khanum even talks about this idea when she traveled the world, about educational prejudice. Oftentimes, people look at ivory towers of education that they can't do anything. But on the contrary, art makes all this applicable. It makes it available to all of us.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we really appreciate this. And Robert Dean, he said he wanted to unmute. Robert, at any time, just interrupt me. Please come in because
Hey there.
as
Can
I
you hear
said, you're
me?
next.
Can you hear
Hello.
me? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
I don't know. You guys want to see?
We can see you too now.
Can't hear you,
Okay, your
Robert.
sound like went really low. Like we can barely hear you now. We did hear you, but then I think you
All
hit
right.
the minus sign on your iPhone.
How's that? Is that better?
We can hear you now. Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm sorry. So this was a brilliant topic because we're raised in Western society, and separation of church and state, or whatever you want to call it. You go to school, you learn mathematics, you learn science, you learn how to sculpt, you learn skills, you learn how to be an auto mechanic. There's no difference in these things. They're tools. If you don't apply the tools, then it's like you said, it's data. It's information. You know, the art of medicine, it's always been called the art of medicine, you know, and they also call it the practice of medicine because you practice till you die, because you never perfect the art of medicine. But there's no difference between a physician, an orthopedic surgeon who knows how to screw and bolt and plate something, and Michelangelo, who's a sculptor, right? I mean, I'm using an extreme.
Yeah.
You learn those tools, but you see, what makes it an art is your interest in it, your mind versus your brain, right? That's what makes us spiritual beings. And this is a very interesting fireside conversation or public discussion if done in a way that simplifies it, because you know most people have the attention span of about 8 seconds, right? But the point is, whether you're a mechanic or a ballerina, or you trim hedges, or you're a chemical engineer, you've learned stuff, right? You learn things, you learn how to jump, you learn how to twist, you learn how a spark plug works. But how you apply that knowledge, that's art. And every single person on this planet is an artist.
Yeah.
Right? That's the point you're trying to make.
Thank you so much, Robert. That is just lovely
it's
to
that
hear that
simple,
you've got it.
actually.
Yeah.
And that's why, you know, work done in the spirit of service has been raised to the rank of worship, right?
Yeah.
Voila. So I
Voila.
don't ever make comments, but I found your discussion amazing. I'm gonna make a 30-second, what is that called? TikTok. I'm gonna put that on there for everybody to say, hey, we're all artists.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
what makes us humans and not cows.
Absolutely. There you go. You've got it.
That's all I have to say. But thank you. Thank you very much.
This is very scintillating. So yeah, Ms. Margaret, as you see, we had quite a bit to glean from this, and clearly we've made some breakthroughs in the discussion here. I think that Mr. Singh Cook.
Yes.
Yes. Hello.
Hello. Can I just raise I don't know, it's a very simple example that I used to have. Can I just raise them with your speaker that for example in mathematics we have induction and deduction. That I would say that's part of science, but a lot of times students couldn't grasp the concept very well, you know, the mathematical concepts. But a very good teacher is able to explain the difficult concepts in very simple terms. And to me, that is an art.
Absolutely. There you go.
and I figure that part of it is as great, if not greater, than the concept of the induction and deduction and all that behind, the mathematical concepts. Because in the end, the benefits go to this students, that they don't feel as if they are incapable of doing this mathematics in the end. I don't know whether that example is applicable to the marvelous talks that you have given today. Thank you.
Absolutely applicable, because that is the art of teaching. How many of us have experienced the teacher who is highly qualified, been through university, got the PhD, has the knowledge, but doesn't have the skill to communicate that knowledge? How many of us have come across that at some point or another in our lives? Yeah, there you go. And it's actually the skill of teaching, the skill of being able to communicate the knowledge, which is of huge importance if you're in the educational context, because otherwise, no point in being there.
I will tell you that my math career was half killed by the terrible teachers. I ended up having a peer teach me a lot better than where I was trying to actually learn. And of course, I ended up doing okay with my grades, but it definitely wasn't easy. Once you get to differential equations, when you do actual creative math, and I'm going to actually say that there is such a thing as math that's creative. Once you get into math where you need to have a knack for the art of mathematics, which actually exists, it's not easy, where you get hit with hard problems and you need to apply all these different tools together to get to the right conclusion. It's genuinely something to think about. And I know, because Margaret, you're in the United Kingdom, you have the International Baccalaureate program. In high school, they even have this higher level math course that they introduce genuine problems that the students have to find creative responses to in a math course. It actually exists in high school somewhere in the world. And it's funny because, that's international, so it also occurs in America. But the point is that it's something that people don't think about. And it's amazing when you realize that it too exists, and there's this creativity everywhere, including mathematics.
Mathematics and physics, people will say to me, if they're maybe a physicist or a chemist, well, I'm not creative. No, come on. Don't try and pull the wool across my eyes. Of course you're creative oh, my phone. Of course you're creative. Of course you can use your creativity in whatever you're doing. Doesn't matter what area of life you're in. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And now I think for our final question, we have Miss Fariba, and then we'll get to closing for today. I'm going to ask her to unmute there. Okay.
Thank you, John. I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I'm just thinking all these thoughts are just as people talk, where maybe science and art would merge in our mind and in our brain is the realm of imagination. So because we have to imagine things if you are going to create something, especially like with mathematics and with physics, things like that, that some of these theories that come out are really not even things that you can prove. It's impossible to prove. But you can, imagine those answers or imagine. And so I think maybe an imagination is a part of our spiritual makeup, is a part of our spirit, is our soul. So I'm thinking that maybe this is the connection. This is where the connection is coming from, the bringing them together, the art and science.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because imagination and creativity are often confused one with the other. But Ken Robinson, again, I'll quote from him because he's been a great inspiration for me. And his way of explaining it was that you could lie on the bed and be imaginative all day long. But to be creative, you've got to do something. You've got to apply your imagination. You've got to put it into practice. You've got to use your skills to create something that would be of use to the world. And that was his definition of the difference between imagination and creativity. But we all have and this is the result of our education system, is that many of us come through that whole process saying, well, I don't have any imagination. Now, how many people over my lifetime have said that to me? I'm not imaginative, I'm not creative, I can't do this. But actually, we all have imagination. We all have the capacity to be creative. We can all use those capacities in our lives. But we've been so educated that we've learnt that, no, we're not any good at that. No, you only have to get one negative comment from a teacher or a peer or somebody in your childhood. That sticks. It sticks until you leave the world. That negative comment, oh, you're no good at this, don't bother with that. Yeah, that stays. And that is such a shame. And that's the art of conversation. Again, think about what you're saying and how you're saying it and to whom you're saying it. All of this is all part of one thing. It's not separate.
So I think that we can get to closing out. I have just a final piece to share from the Baha'i writings with everyone. And this is just for further for further thought that people can take and reflect on. So the Baha'i writings say the original source of all human inspiration comes from the creative word. God's word reaches us through the revelation of the great faiths. Abdu'l-Baha says that the creative words and phrases which salute the hearts of humanity actually constitute one of the proofs of the validity of the divine message of each major religion. Baha'is believe that the love each of the prophets of God brings us through their deeds and their words actually creates an entirely new consciousness, a revitalization of human existence. Of course, I can dwell further into this, but it's worth noting that the creative word is a genuine thing. It's a real thing. And for those of you who haven't looked at Ruhi Book 6 and the Institute process, the creative word is the subject in Unit 1 of Book 6. Definitely those of you who haven't done Ruhi Book 6, please take a look. It's an amazing book. I just wanted to call everyone's attention as well, speaking of books, before we close out, to Miss Margaret's book that she had written on the subject today. And just to be clear, the subject today, Science and Art, the title is The Science and Art of Being Human, published with George Ronald Publishing, of course, by Miss Margaret Appa. So you can find The Science of Art, The Science and Art of Being Human by Miss Margaret Appa right now online. And if you could, Miss Margaret, tell me, they can buy it on Amazon, they can buy it on the George Ronald Publishing website.
Or the Baha'i book suppliers, they can order it because they could order it from George Ronald, yeah. But it is available on Amazon, yeah.
Lovely. So again, just lastly to repeat, The Science and Art of Being Human, which is with the George Ronald Publishing Company by Miss Margaret Appa. It's available should you wish to delve deeper into the subject of today's discussion. We welcome it because it's through this understanding and continued research and investigation through, like we cited some Baha'i writings today, through going and investigating, and also read Book 6, joining a study circle, learning about the creative word and how it affects us, and really the art of speaking. That is, the having understanding and using utterance to help others understand, and teaching. These are really important in our lives, and we as a community really appreciate that Miss Margaret Appa was here with us to discuss this subject. Now, for all of you who have just joined and you are liking this video, we welcome you on YouTube and Facebook, please, to like, share, and comment. The community really benefits from having people like these videos and share them, because that means the content is relevant online. What's more relevant than this? But it's not just that. We are able to carry conversations forward through sharing. And we hope that in doing so, you'll go back to these books that we talked about, read and learn. And as Miss Margaret Appa was talking about, imagination and creativity, that you'll use your creativity, in addition to being imaginative with how you can, share it, you can be creative in how you share it. You can be creative in how you apply the new knowledge you learn. So with that being said, we thank all of you for being here today, especially Miss Margaret Appa. Hopefully you'll join us again for another session. As you see, people were inspired to share, to comment, to ask questions. We hope that all of the people watching this video who leave comments will also be touched just as much as we were here today. With that said, we hope you all have a happy Sunday, and we look forward to seeing you next week on Baha'i Explorations.